Hey guys, how are you guys doing? I hope you guys are enjoying the series. Today we're going to do the episode number 10 and we'll be addressing the logout button, also installing sockets.io and registering the event, the registration event. So we're going to start opening the front end. So I have here both front end and back end running, and we're going to go for the dashboard page. So here in the dashboard page, basically what we want to do super quickly is create a button. So if you scroll down a little bit, we can see that we have a few buttons here. So I will add another group. So I want to add a button group here, and I'll be moving this button inside the group. And basically you can copy and paste this button again, but we want the logout button, right? So we're going to do a logout button that basically will have a function that will be the logout handler. And these both buttons need to be indented so we can declare our function here. So be const logout handler handler. This will be an arrow function that will do a few things. Before I do anything, I want to show you how we basically log in, right? So if you go and log in and you have a look here, you can note that basically when we return the user, we create local storage for the set user and set user ID. So if we're trying to log out the user, we want to make sure that we delete these things. So coming back here, you can paste that stuff, but instead to be set item, we want to do remove item, and basically we can delete this second argument because this doesn't need second argument, and that would log out the user. The only thing I would say, when you're logging out the user, let's make sure that we can push the user to the login page like this one. So there you have it. So now we have three main actions there. If you go back to the front end, and now you have a logout and events page, I think this should be red, should be different color. So I will change mine to danger. Now if you go to the page, you can see that this is red already, right? And if you do inspect the page and you go for application, you can see that we have in local storage, we have both the user ID and the user, right? So what we want to do is make sure that when we click here, they are gone. In the same second, we rotate the client. So that's perfect. This is the login button. We can log in again to test. And you can see as soon as we log in, we have both things again. So now we can go to events, we can cancel, we can go to logout, we can log in again, and this is all working fine. So this is the first part of this episode, and now I would like to show you a little bit more about the sockets.io, right? So what is sockets.io? So imagine that the server has two ways of communication, right? We have this HTTP request that we do all the times. That means we send the request, we wait for the server to process, and the server send the response. That's why we use promise and async await. But we also have another protocol of communication. This is well known by WebSockets. So if you Google for WebSockets, you will find the protocol. And WebSockets is a computer communication protocol providing full duplex communication channel over a single TCP connection. So you probably heard about two expressions before. One is very common and well known by polling, So that means when you need a lot of information from the server, you can pull from the server a lot of times. So this will be a lot of communications between the front end and back end, like so, like going down, 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 down. And every time you can see if some information have changed. However, the WebSocket is more known as a streaming of data. So it's not only the client asking to the server if the server has a new data or it has different data, but now the server has the capability to tell the client that something have changed. So that's how you do live database. That's how you do a lot of things in web applications. So we're gonna start installing two libraries to help us out. The library is socket.io. So if you never heard about socket.io, this is the website. So I strongly suggest you to come by, play a little bit, see how that does work, and try a little bit. So basically all the chats, streaming of data, and many other things, use that library to do that. So we're going to start pausing our backend, and we're going to install npm install socket.io. And we will stop our front end, and we're going to install socket.io dash client. That is the client to connect to the server. Now we need to do a few modifications here, right? Because if you think about how does that work, we need to extract the server inside the Express so that we can inform the server that we want to use the HTTP server and the sockets, right? So here I'm gonna push this a little bit down so that we can concentrate the sockets here. So we're gonna define here a server. This server will need us to import another library. That library, it's like path, is a library directly from node.js. So we're gonna start adding here const http. This is equal require http, right? And we also want to import const socket.io, and this will be equal to require and socket.io. Okay, so now that we have socket.io and HTTP, basically what we can do is create our connections. So here in server, what we want to do is basically do http dot server, and then we want to pass our app inside the server. And now we want to define const io. This will be equals to socket io because we're going to initialize our server. And that's basically the main change that we need to do. Let me put that here. And now with the socket io, we can try our connection for the first time. And that's how we're going to do it. We're going to do io dot on, because on is a function that takes an event, and then we can say on connection and pass a socket and a function. So basically, to test this out, I like to use front end and back end together. So I'm going to do console.log, and this will be user is connected, and we're going to return also the socket.id, because every time that the user connects to the server for the first time, the server will assign a socket ID to that user so that we can know which user are which user, and we can keep track of them, and we can send a specific message to specific users. So in the front end, in the dashboard, we want to do basically the similar thing. So we're going to import here, import socket.io from socket.io client. Remember that the front end consumes the client, And basically we want to tell React to use an effect. This means every time, at least one time when the component is mounted, we want to define a socket. So here I will pass an array like so. This means that I want to do just once per user. So then what I can do here, just so that we can test, is basically define socket. Will be socket IO, and the socket IO requires us to pass a string, and this is the URL where we want to connect. So in this case will be HTTP, and then it will be localhost dash. If you look here, let's start the server again. We are connected to the door 8000. This is all I need to do, and now I can start my front end. Oops. Let's do run dev. If you go in the server now, I forgot to do something. Now that we have a server, basically what we want to do, instead to do app.listen, we want to do server.listen. Okay, and then now when we're in the dashboard page, we can basically refresh this page, and we should try to connect here. So let me make sure I have the right URL. This is 8000, right? Yeah. Can you see? As soon as I fix the URL, it showed user is connected. And now we have a user ID. So just to show you a little bit about this amazing library, see how many lines of code we added, like few lines, 3-4 lines per client, so client and server, and we are able to connect already. So this library sockets.io is very powerful, easy to use, and we can do a lot of things with that. So just to show how does that works, we could also do here io.emit. We could create an event, any name. In my case, I'll create an event with my name, and I could send a data to it. It could be anything. It could be an object that has a data tag that means hello world. So now I'm emitting that Jean. So look how amazing is that. We can come back to the front end, and then we can say socket.on, and then Jean, I want to get the data, and console.log the data. So now every time that I emit the event, see, data here is like, it could be a response. It's not necessary the data. I think this is very basic in JavaScript. You probably understand that. So I just wanted to change so that you don't misunderstand with the data inside. So that means with a few lines of code, the server now has the power to identify a specific user and send information to the user. So that's basically how socket.io works. So we work based on sending and receiving events, right? So that's how it does work. It's very nice. I hope that you guys enjoy about sockets. This is changed completely the way we can build our apps, and that's how we're gonna use to send notifications to the users, right? So the next thing that we want to do, basically we want now to be able to subscribe for an event. And remember, the way that that's going to work is basically my user that is logged in subscribe to this specific user, the person who created this event, will be able to accept or deny this request. So that means I need to pay the price. That will be directly, we're not going to handle payments here, but just to show you how you could subscribe, and then you could have like a WhatsApp or like a messaging or your phone number so that you contact the user, and when you guys make the payment, you could accept or reject that subscription, right? So that's basically how we're gonna do. Another thing that's very interesting, guys, that we can send things, we can send up some information from the user directly to our server. So right now we have a socket defined here, but what we want to do is also send the user details, right? So remember that we have this user here that is stored inside the local storage, and this is basically our hashed user with all the information that we need to know which user is connected, right? So what we want to do here, we can basically pass a second argument here. If you have a look, there is an options, and then we can send an object and a query, and this query can take another object, and then inside this what we can pass is a user, right? So now every time that I connect in the socket, I'm also send which user is connected, because like this ID that we can see here, this is the socket ID, but I don't know if this is Jean, I don't know if this is Fernando, I don't know if this is Paulo, if this is Francis, I don't know who is that person, right? So I need to send the user to the backend so that we can work out in the backend which user is connected. And then the nice thing about that is if you go back to your server, how can we, I'm going to delete this emit because we're not going to need that. But then the question I ask you, how can we know which user is connected now? So basically what we can do here. So basically what we can do, I'm going to add here node console log just to show you. And then what we're going to do, we're going to do a socket dot handshake, and this is when one server is talking to another one. And then we can go to our friend query here, and I'm going to console this log to show you. So now it's going to connect. The first thing after connected, it sends a user with a little bit more information how that works. But basically remember that this is the JWT token, and from that we can take the username, we can basically do whatever we need, because this will be passed through to our controllers. So that's how we're gonna consume that. So now the next thing that we want to do is basically there's a few things actually that we need to do, but basically right now we need to save in the memory of the server all the information about the users that are connected. So guys, just to be clear here, right, this is not how you would do in production. You would use a database to store this information. You could even use MongoDB. But this type of information needs to be processed very quickly, and then I would recommend you to look more about Redis to do that, right? So right now we're going to use memory, so just keep in mind this is not the ideal solution, but that's how we're doing here, because we're just learning concepts, right? We're not building something that we're going to sell. So there we go. I will create a const. This will be a connected user and users, because it will be plural, will be more than one user, and I'll have an object. Now that I have an object that I'm going to store in memory, I want to make sure that I can tell the server who is the user. So here I'm going to basically delete that, and here I will destructure the user from this, right? So we know that inside this we have a user. So now what I want to do is basically to connect the users, and I need to do like that, user equal socket.id. So let me explain what we're doing. Basically, every time that I have a new user connected, the server will generate a socket ID that basically was printed before here. Let's scroll a little bit up. These numbers. And this is much short numbers. So I'm creating a relation between the user hash, the user token, and the socket ID. So that down in the line, if I'm inside a controller and something happens and I need to find this user, I can find him using socket ID. Does that make any sense? So if you know, you don't need to be worried. We're gonna carry on now building this app, and I will show you and I will mention when we're consuming that exactly so that you can make that relation. If you have any doubt, please send me a message. Remember that now we have right now we have a Discord group, so you can also look in the description of this video and connect on the Discord group. I'm more than happy to help you. Okay, so let's carry on. So now what we want to do, guys, is make sure that we can have access to all this information from the connection inside our requests. And to achieve that, we're going to use middlewares again. So basically what I want to do, I just want to copy this. I will remove that from here. I will put after this try. I will move this app use down there as well so that we be a little bit more organized with the app.use. So basically we're going to pass directly a function here. This is a very simple middleware, so I will keep here because it's closer to the server, so that makes all the sense. So be rec, res, and next again, and this will be a function like so. And here we want to do a few things. We want to get the request.io, and this will be equal the IO. So we defined the IO up here. So basically what that means, we are passing to our request the sockets, and we also want to pass the connected user. This will be equal to connected users, right? So why are we doing that? And we need to return here a next before I forget. Okay, so otherwise we're gonna get stuck here and the code never is gonna be processing here. So if you remember how we did the middleware to verify all the requests that we had, the verify token, this will be the same. So imagine that now inside the controller we would be able to come here and say rec.io and do events when we need to send events, and we will be able to find rec.connected users and connected the users, and we will have inside here all the users that are connected. So that's basically why we're doing that. Okay, so now that we do that, we can start building the next step. Let's just delete that. So now it's going to become very interesting, right? So inside the registration controller, we're going to use what we just did, right? So now remember, every time that we are creating a new registration, that means it's a request, there's a few things happening here. So we are populating the event, and we are also populating the user, right? And remember that when we populate the event, if you look here, the insomnia, we had this create here. So the event will bring us a user inside. And this user, before we did all the changes for the token, it was the user ID, but now it is the user token, right? And remember that the user token, we're gonna have access inside here. So the first thing that we need to do is convert that to use the same structure that we had before. So if you go in routes, you can see that we're not passing the verify token to that function. So this is the basically what we're going to do now. So we're going to start with the post. This will be the event to create one event. So then here we're going to add this, and this is basically will be very similar to this post here. So remember this first line, so we'll copy this, and then we can come back there to the event, to the create one, and then the first thing that we need to import will be JWT, and this will be required from JSON Web Token. And now that we have that, you probably remember that we did this in the previous episode a few times. So we're gonna paste this line here, and basically we're gonna close it here, and we will do if and else, and the if is the error. So if it has error, we do something, otherwise we do what we normally do, right? So I'm gonna copy all of this, I'll paste inside here. It's all looking good. I think I'm just missing to close this this one here. So here I need to close there, and now it's perfectly, yeah, now it's working fine. So now inside the auth data we're gonna have the user, right? That essentially for the new users, the new events that we're gonna create will be basically the user dot event dot user, right? Actually it will be the registration, right? Yeah. So now that we have this here, let me just copy from there or here to do the same thing. So if it's not authorized, we're gonna send 401 like we did before. And now it's going to start to become very interesting, guys. What we're going to do, it will be very, very nice. I hope that you guys enjoy, because now we're going to start to play with WebSockets quite a lot. So the first thing that we're doing here, just to remind you a little bit, we get in the user ID from the headers, but this is no longer a user ID, not from the headers, because now we want the user ID. So we'll say user, we want it from here, authData.user.id. Okay, so if we do look here again, event ID, so it will be ID instead, user ID. Yeah, so now we get the user ID, right? So because why do we need the user ID? Basically because when we are creating the user here, we need to pass the ID of the user that is registering the events, right? So let's catch up a little bit about this so that we don't make confusion. So when I click subscribe, I'm logged in, I am Jean, right? So I have the user ID and I want to subscribe to this event. However, this event is not me who created. So I want to subscribe to a normal event that I haven't created. In that case, I am the user registering for that. However, the event, inside the event, we have a user ID there that basically we're going to use to find the user ID. So now what we can do from the owner, I mean, the user ID from the owner, so that we can send a request, a WebSocket request to him. So now what we can say here, const owner socket, this is will be equal rec dot connected users. Remember that we insert that here, right? Connected users, so that you know where this is coming from. inside these connected users, I'm gonna look for the registration dot event because I'm populating here. So I will have the event dot user. So this will return a token, right? Why is going to return a token? Previously, so that I'm very clear with that, previously we had a user ID, but since we are protecting the routes, we no longer send the user ID for anything. We're sending just the token, and we're going to do the same for the new events. So this event here is not going to work, but for the newer ones, they're going to work. And then if I have a owner socket, this is the owner of the event. So if I have an owner socket, so that means is the owner socket logged in right now in our server? If he is, we want to send a notification to him. So that's going to be rec.io because we did that thing. Then we can do .to and then owner socket because we won't send just to him. And we're going to emit an event that we're going to call registration request. And basically now I want to send this whole thing to him. Why are we doing that? Because then in the front end we will be able to build something with that. We will be able to have all this information if he's logged in, and then we're going to be able to create for him a notification, right? So that's basically what we're doing now. We can go to the front end. We can try to listen for this. Initially just console log to make sure that that's working, so that we can know how we're going to build that in the front end. So if you go to the front end, inside the dashboard, we have the sockets here, right? So what we want to do now, basically what we want to do a sockets.on. We want to listen for a specific event that we defined here. So it's a registration request. And then if that happens, we're gonna get data back, and I want for now to console log the data, right? If we come back here to this button, let's start doing that. The subscribe button, in reality, this is basically a registration request, right? So registration request. So let's rename that so it makes more sense to us. And then what we will do now, we will add a function on click here. So basically it will be on click. This is will take a registration request handler, and we want to pass the event. So because we want to pass something to this function, you need to remember that then it needs to be an arrow function here, okay? Otherwise you can't pass arguments. So now we need to define this function. Let's do that here. We're gonna say const registration request handler. This will be an async function. And basically what this is going to be, this is going to be an API dot post request to register. I think is register NID. I will double check that in a second. Oh, hold on. Register, I think will be event.id. Okay. Here will be event coming to us, and let's double check that before we make something wrong. Okay. So if you go to the routes, you can say to create. So it is registration events ID. Yeah. So then we can come back there. It's registration event ID. Remember that here there's a thing, right? to register this, we need to pass an empty object because we're not sending any data really. But what we're sending here, it will be an object with headers, and these headers will have user inside. Okay, so this is the user that I need to send, so that you're clear what I'm doing here, that will go through the authentication, right? It will be added, the token will be checked here, and then in the route, after that's happened here, we have the created here where we can check the user here. Okay, so that's why we need to send that. That's very important actually. So now that we have that, this is the only thing that we need to send, because as you can see here, oh, hold on, this date, we don't need to send this date, okay? And the event ID will be from the params. Okay, let me think. Yeah, so that's what we're doing here. If you look at the front end, we're sending the event ID and the user. From the event ID and the user, we can get the user ID, and we can find the user and the event with the ID. This date here, we don't need to send that because we can create that in the module, right? So let's fix that. If you go in the models, in registration, where we have date, here we can do a function that will be date.now. So this is basically do what we need, because what we need is like when you trigger a function, at that moment in time, create a date property that has this, right? So that's what we need to do. The approved will be a boolean that we're going to change later on, but this is now okay. So let's create a new event. And basically, so we need to do two things. We need to create a new event. So the new event is under the new specification. Then we need to create a new user, connect in a different window browser, and go there and click to subscribe, right? So that's basically what we need to do. But before, let's make sure that our code is correct. So this will be a wait. Basically what we can do here, we can use the same approach. We can use try and catch. So let's do that. Try and catch. Then we can move this here. If something goes wrong, we can also create a custom message that we don't have yet. So what I will do, I will come back here. You can see that we have a success and error, and I will say const message handler and set message handler. So we're just fixing this stuff. Use state, and as a default, this will be empty string. So now let's first look where we're using success. So here we want to set message handler to be whatever it was there. So success, the event, blah 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 blah. Not even reading that, but that's what we want to do. Okay. So let's find that again. Success. I completed pass-through. Yeah, here. So now I can paste the message here, and then basically after here we need to set the message handler to be empty again, because we're gonna use the same mechanism, right? If something goes wrong when we're deleting, we can say do basically the same thing. So we can come here and say set message handler and set message handler empty string. So then now that we're doing that, we don't do for anything else, we just do for delete. But for now, let's add this here, right? So we can copy this mechanism here completely, and then inside the registration request we want to do basically the same thing, with the difference that we can say this will be the request, right? So the request for the event, and then here we can do event.title was successfully, and then we need to change this to template strings because we have the event here inside this function, right? And then basically this is the same thing, and then for the error we can do basically the error one. That will be the same thing, we're just gonna change the message a little bit. So wasn't successfully. Okay, that's fine for me. You can customize yours. I'm more interested to show you the code and not the text or the other small details. That is not that important for me. So now that we have this message, we need to remember to set the message here, right? Because the message now will be dynamically generated. There you have it.